I'm a civil rights and housing rights attorney at a nonprofit in downtown Los Angeles. And I came out here specifically in regards to this. I oppose a mandatory spay and neuter initiative for pit bulls. First, there's nothing specific about breed-specific legislation. It's breed-discriminatory legislation. Pit bulls isn't a type of breed. It's just a type of dog. They're all mixed. And there's no way to necessarily decipher what is a pit bull type dog. I recently rescued, or about 2 years ago, a pit bull type dog who was cruising down the 110 freeway during rush hour traffic. I pulled over to came out of my car and rolled directly on his back. And then he did one of these where he's about 60 pounds, just laid on the floor, and I had to pick him up, put him in my car, and he's been the happiest boy ever since. It's a myth, really, Mr. Goodland, in regards to that pit bulls do not release. A dog is a dog, an animal is an animal. But specifically to the concerns that you are addressing, a lot of it has to do with what the media portrays. And a lot of time the media portrays exactly what is going to be, get the most hits. And so you're not going to see an attack in regards to a golden retriever type dog or a Labrador type dog. And quite frankly, a lot of the time the media states that it's a pit bull type dog, and then we learn that it's exactly not, that it's a Mastiff or it's a Cane Corso, a completely different type of dog. As I was stating, I'm a nonprofit attorney. I work with low-income families. I see specifically the effect of low-income families that are faced when they're losing their house due to their type of dog. In educating them, letting them know that there's resources available, low cost or free spay and neuters, having vouchers over in the city of LA. They do provide free vouchers if you qualify for these vouchers. A lot of these low-income folks have transportation issues, so having to deal with that. I think that better is that education campaign than having a full-out mandatory spay and neuter. Really what the intent is, I fear, Mr. Goodman, what your intention is to ban pit bull type dogs versus trying to ban what is the bad behavior of ownership. If you want to focus on what is, I think what you said, citizens who do not care for the dogs, then focus on citizens who do not care for their dogs. Enforce the dangerous dog laws that you have. Enforce the laws that you have if there's a dog out loose. Enforce those laws. Educate the people. But don't ban the breed or don't discriminate against a breed when really what you have a problem with is bad ownership. So there's, for instance, I go back to what I do in my work every day. I deal with landlords and I deal with tenants. Not every landlord is great, not every landlord, not every tenant is great. But when I educate both sides and I bring them to the table, that's where meaningful stuff happens. And that's what I feel, in sitting through the city council meeting, I feel that Jurupa Valley is great. There's great comments everywhere. You guys specifically in addressing this woman's concerns with the underpass. It was a great conversation. So continue to have that conversation. Continue to figure out what's the best way to deal with what is bad ownership versus just placing the blame on a particular type of breed that, frankly, I'm not quite sure how you're going to enforce that. Right? How are you going to figure out what that kind of breed is and the cost in trying to enforce that? Thank you.
Most everybody is for voluntary spay and neuter. All my dogs are spayed and neutered. Educating, making things more affordable, more accessible, and lifting communities up. Everybody's behind that. This legislation is not that. This legislation is based on the false premise that all pit bulls are vicious and a detriment to public safety. That's what this legislation comes out of. The state of California just disallows bans, so this is what Robert Miller in the county of Riverside has left you guys with. That's not my opinion. Mr. Goodland, with all due respect, came out and said in the media that he would prefer a ban. So and he's the one that proposed the legislation. So this isn't about spay and neuter. This is about banning pit bulls, which you can't do. So the second best option is to spay them all or neuter them all, so they kind of cease to exist, basically, in a generation or two. The reality is millions of pit bull type dogs exist in the country, 99.9% infinity of which have never done anything to anybody. Secondly, Riverside County has a mandatory spay and neuter, and they've had it since 2009 for all dogs. So does the city of Riverside. Yet they both, in tandem, in October of 2013, passed this legislation. Pit bulls are dogs. They fell under the 2009 legislation. Whether it's secondary enforcement or not, they could have changed it. Those moves are anemic and unintelligent government. When talking about actual dangerous dogs, they need to be dealt with on an individual basis and based on their actual behavior instead of just criminalizing dogs that look a certain way. In regards to dogs that attack, maim, kill humans, there's always three circumstances that undoubtedly are aligned with these incidents. One are roaming and loose dogs, which Mr. Johnston already brought up. That's your responsibility on the human, letting his dog just roam, regardless of the breed. Chained and resident yard dogs. These are dogs that are unsupervised, that are basically cheap alarm systems for people. Throw them out in the yard. They're not an animal to these people. This is bad ownership. And the third thing is unsupervised children. Now, any of those circumstances involving any type of dog, the outcome can be negative. Breed identification, as Ms. Prado brought up, and last meeting Dr. Drusi's brought up a really ridiculous metaphor with porn, viewing porn, and how it's easy to call out a pit bull. That's nonsense. What this type of legislation does is overreach. It affects 30, 40, 50 types of dogs. And because when the media uses a slang term of pit bull, they're not talking about a specific dog. They're talking about a dog that looks a certain way to them, which is a subjective opinion. There's no consistency whatsoever. And in regards to the enforcement and what Riverside County said, there's things happening in the city of Indio right now. And it's an incorporated city, just like you guys. And what Riverside County are doing are they're leaving the gated and affluent communities alone. And they're going into the low-income communities, the Spanish-speaking communities, and they're attempting to enforce these laws. They're leaving citations for $100 per pop, $100 if you don't have your dog vaccinated, $100 if you don't have it sterilized, $100 if it's not microchipped, and $100 if it's not licensed. So that's a $400 citation for each dog. And they're doing these knock and talks into these low-income communities, and they're leaving citations at people's doors when the people aren't even home. They're whistling, they're knocking on doors, getting dogs to bark, and then they're basically leaving citations when they had no human interaction. They're leaving detailed citations when they've never met the dogs. And these are mostly Spanish-speaking people. Nothing's in Spanish. Nothing on their website is in Spanish. They're giving them 20 days to comply. A lot of these people have citations that are for $1,200 because they may have 2, 3, 4 dogs, $1,600. You can't comply in 20 days under something like that when you're poor, when you may not have transportation. It's a major problem. So in contrast to that, educate, lift up the communities, and do not discriminate against dogs. Thank you.
My first response to the gentleman that was just up here, can't afford a dog, don't have one. AKC has always jumped on any organization, any county or city that has tried to pass spay and neuter laws for all dogs. They want their registration fees. They don't care about the dog. They don't care about the people. They want their registration fees. And a lot of those fees come from backyard breeders that don't know what the heck they're doing. I'm not for singling out any particular breed. I think you were given a flyer. Did you pass those out to council?
We have it, yes.
Yeah, of all the dead dogs that are daily dumped into barrels. I'm for mandatory spay and neuter of all dogs, unless they're registered to a kennel or a trainer. People in their backyards don't have any business breeding dogs. They breed a lot of deformed, horrible animals into the world. I get upset on this subject. As far as education, for 35 to 40 years, we have been trying to educate the public. Much money has been spent trying to educate the public. They don't care unless you hit them in the pocketbook. That's the only time they're going to care. It's kind of like the noise ordinance. We need to put a stop to the slaughter of all these innocent animals just because somebody wants to make a buck. And as you can see on those flyers were made about 25 years ago, and it hasn't changed one bit. So I would like to see you, because you have the power to put a dent in this reckless breeding and call for a mandatory spay and neuter of dogs. I don't know if you could ever enforce it with cats, but at least you could start with dogs. Thank you for your consideration.